Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yay. I think we've got technology on our side.
Sometimes it just works out.
I tell you, today has been the second Monday of the week,
I totally agree
but
with you.
it's
I had a
actually, well, it started for me at 5,
mhm.
um, and it's been a long one.
Yeah, mine didn't start quite that early, but it's been a long one. I had another hearing for a different project up in Benton County that started at 11 and just got over.
Nice.
So I've had a long day. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kelly and Lily, you can hear us fine? I was there.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna just probably mute the audio. 2.5 years out of high school
Fine.
going.
Okay.
Thank
Yep.
you.
And I'm going to mute out too for a while so you don't hear me slurping.
Again, you want us to sign it in some way?
Yes, please, sign your project.
Yeah, it's gonna grab it. Whoever's talking, it's in the front on the table on there.
Anyone who's speaking, so. Yeah.
It's definitely so they do it as meeting.
You can just, no, you just can number. Yeah, you can, if you want. There we go. Sure, it's in.
Five.
Oh, really? Is that- Oh, yeah, it's a laugh, oh, sure.
That's not what it is.
Oh. So then, you know. Last. Let's go through that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I was thinking of a different one night. Good. You put it like, I don't know. Yeah, this way, second. Then you don't have to. You might want to. Just you two today and Lily on the
And
phone.
Lily on the phone.
Yes,
Yes, I am.
perfect.
Yeah, you
We can hear you on the too.
Yeah.
Is that you?
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Oh, I need to grab them.
I think we need to get a cutout of me. We can put in a chair.
Need to set up a component there, so they're not about the old fire.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. That's one of them.
So it is 6:30, it'll be everybody.
Sounds like it's up for you.
Okay, and I will call meeting of the Anita Planning Commission to order. First item of business will be to review the agenda and see if there are any adjustments. Then we will have an opportunity for public comment on an issue that is not on the planning commission agenda for tonight. We will have an opportunity to review and perhaps approve the minutes of the previous meeting on July 7th. We do have one public hearing. It's called additional hearing. Case files SR 26-1, B 26-2, PLA 26-1, DP 26-1, SG 26-1, and SG 26-2 for Bonita Family Dental. And then we have Cascadia Partners with us to discuss the report they have aired on a whole bunch of concepts, including a code audit. We have an open discussion and an activity report. And we then need to discuss a potential joint meeting with the city council sometime in the fall, I guess, probably. And set our next meeting date for September 21, 2026. Any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll have an opportunity for public comment on issues that are not before the agenda tonight. Is there anyone who has signed up for public comment?
There's no one signed up for public comment, not on the agenda.
Okay, and is there anyone online who would like to make public comment on an issue that's not on the agenda?
I don't believe so. I think Kelly is with Sandown. Is that for the?
With the applicant. for
With the
public
applicant,
hearing, yeah.
okay.
Okay, very good. Then we will move on to the July 7, 2026 minutes. We have them before you. You've had an opportunity to review them. Are there any proposed changes or corrections?
I have none.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented unless there's objection, and that motion will be agreed to, and seeing no objection, the motion is agreed to. The next item on the agenda is a for a public hearing on a proposal by the Bonita Family Dental. We will open the public hearing. And then we will take a staff report. We'll have an opportunity for the applicant to testify in support. We will also have an opportunity for anyone else who wishes to testify in favor and then testify in opposition. And finally, if there is anyone who wishes to testify on the issue but not take a position, they will have an opportunity. The applicant then will have an opportunity to rebut. We then will, if there is no further testimony, close the public hearing and the record, and the planning commission can deliberate. Open the public hearing. I should point out that when you are testifying, please come forward to the podium or online, announce yourself, give your name and address, and present your argument in favor or opposed or with respect to the proposal. Please, in doing so, assure that the criteria for approval, which are set out in the staff report, please do not go on beyond the criteria. Testimony that is not relevant to the criteria will not be considered by the planning commission. Once we close the record and close the public hearing, there will be no further testimony permitted. If you are testifying, please keep in mind that you should mention all issues which you believe are relevant to the issues at hand in the proposal. Failure to participate in this public hearing, either by orally or in writing, will preclude right to appeal to the council, or as the case may be, to LUBA, and failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the decision maker to respond to the issue will preclude an action in circuit court. If there are no further questions, I will then turn to staff for a staff report.
Thank you, Chair Goodman, members of the commission. Thank you, Jen. For you tonight is a request for a site plan review of variance, property line adjustment, type C tree removal permit, and 2 sign permits for the Benita Family Dental proposal. Next slide, please. These are the approval criteria for the request. These can also be found and are listed in the staff report. Thank you. Notice was mailed, posted at City Hall on our website, posted on site and on July 14th. It was published in the Register Guard on July 20th. No public comment was received during or even after the comment period. The proposal is for development on these 2 properties here in red, on the southeast corner of Territorial Road and Highway 126. To the south is the Fern Ridge Shopping Center. To the east is some self-storage units. To the north is Highway 126, and the west is Territorial Road. The subject site is entirely surrounded by commercial uses. The blue here is highway commercial. To the west and south, and then to the east and north is industrial commercial. The reason that this is before the planning commission tonight is because the applicant has requested a variance to the access spacing standards of Benita Zoning and Development Code section 5.2 full subsection 4, which regulates how far apart new access points such as driveways or street intersections have to be from existing driveways or other intersections. The minimum distance depends on the classification of the road. For busier, more major roads, more distance is required in between these new access points. The reason for this is that every access point represents a potential point of conflict between traffic. Each new driveway is with a chance for an accident to happen as cars pull out and onto the road. On busier roads, fewer access points reduces the likelihood of accidents as it reduces these points of conflict. On local roads, this isn't really an issue. Cars are driving slowly enough and can expect other people to be walking, biking, pulling out of their driveways, etc. It becomes more of a problem, like I mentioned, on these busier roads. So this property has frontage off of Highway 126 and Territorial Road. Highway 126 is a major arterial. We don't have our own local access spacing standards for that highway. We defer to ODOT since it's their highway. ODOT is restrictive when it comes to granting new accesses, and there's no chance they would grant access to this property on the Highway 126 so close to the intersection with Territorial Road. Territorial Road is under Lane County's jurisdiction, but they defer to our access spacing of 300 feet. Between access points on minor arterial roads, which is what Territorial Road is classified as. And this property currently shares an existing access point with the Burnbridge Shopping Center right here. This access point was installed prior to the city's adoption of these current access spacing standards. So it's a legal access point grandfathered in essentially, even though it itself right now doesn't meet this standard as it's located within 300 feet of the intersection with Luther Lane and Territorial Road to the south. The applicant would not normally need a variance if they were just going to use the access point as it currently exists, but they're proposing to modify the access point and shift it to the south by around 35 feet or so. The image on this slide right here shows the distance from the modified proposed access to the closest intersections, the closest access points. The access spacing standard is met from the proposed driveway to the intersection of Territorial and 126, over 300 feet away. But it is being moved closer to the intersection with Luther Lane. It is only about 222 feet apart. So this image on the left here shows the existing driveway access. Here you can see the entrance to the shopping center and then to the subject property to the north. This driveway right here is what currently serves that property, which is the one under consideration tonight. The original proposal was to use that existing access and just widen the service driveway to the subject site. This raised some concerns over how close this driveway here is to the Territorial Road access. Vehicles entering the site, waiting to turn left to the service driveway could potentially be blocked by vehicles queuing to leave the site. This could lead to longer queues in Territorial Road from southbound vehicles attempting to turn left into the site, longer queues from northbound vehicles attempting to turn right into the site. A delay in northbound vehicles turning right would block the travel lane in Territorial Road. The county found that the original proposal would cause driveway performance to deteriorate significantly due to the atypical access configuration, which is likely to block entering and existing traffic. Fixing this subpar access configuration is a bit difficult. The city and the county can't require the shopping center to the east here to make any improvements on their property as part of this development, since they're not party to this application. This limits improvements to the access point to what can be done in the right of way only, which is everything to the west of this line here. The revised proposal, though, which you can see in the image on the right, allows for 2 vehicles to queue at the exit, which reduces the likelihood of vehicles blocking the service driveway into the subject site to the north right here. This reduces the likelihood of traffic or impacts to traffic safety and operations at this driveway on Territorial Road. Lane County didn't support the original proposal, but they will accept this revised driveway alignment. Our own traffic engineer found that relocation of the approach does not appear to raise any safety concerns or conflict with other existing approaches intersecting Territorial Highway. They also remarked that it is noted that the proposed location does not provide optimal circulation of vehicles around the existing drive-through coffee stand development on the adjacent property right here. However, there may be no other reasonable alternative to satisfy the conditions with improvements that would be required to the adjacent property, conditions, and meet Lane County's requirements. Section 5.24, subsection 4 of the Benita Zoning and Development Code states that where strict application of the standards would create a safety hazard, the city may allow a variance for Article 10 of this ordinance. The existing design of the access is less safe so far compared to the proposed modifications, so the applicant has opted to apply for this variance to the standard to meet the county's concerns. Staff, for these reasons, is supportive of the variance due to the traffic safety and operating benefits mentioned. So without this modification, the development wouldn't be able to move forward due to the issues with the existing access. Next slide, please, Jim. The other item that staff wanted to bring to the commission's attention is in regards to the off-street parking requirements. Section 5.20 of our development code requires a development to provide parking spaces, so table 5.20A. Snippet of which is shown in this green table there. The second floor of the dental clinic has a floor area of just over 6,000 square feet. Total parking requirement for that would be 30.4 spaces. But it's kind of tough to determine the parking requirements for this proposal because the exact uses of the ground floor are not known. The first floor spaces, it's meant to be leasable commercial space. They could fall under really any of these four uses, either retail or grocery stores, bank or office, medical and dental clinic, or eating and drinking establishment, restaurants, bars. We just don't know. And all of these come with different parking requirements. On the low end, you have the retail or grocery store use, which requires one space per 400 feet of floor area. On the higher end, you have a medical or dental clinic or a eating and drinking establishment, which requires one space per 200 square feet of floor area. The ground floor has a total of about 6,400 feet of floor area, and the parking requirements could vary pretty significantly depending on the exact use and combination of uses. If it were all rented for retail, our code would only require 16 spaces. If it were all rented for a medical clinic or a restaurant, the requirement would be a lot higher, around 32 spaces. If you take the average of all the requirements, it comes out to 25 spaces. That added up with the dental clinic parking requirements would bring you to a total of 56 required spaces, rounding up fractional spaces per the direction of our code. If this method of averaging is accepted, then the applicant's proposal comes close. They have 54 parking spaces. The city can grant a reduction in the required amount of parking up to 50% per 5.2 or section 5.20 subsection 11. Staff is supportive of the request. A reduction of 2 spaces out of a total of 56 is minor in nature, and the other site improvements make it essentially impossible to fit more parking spaces on. Without reducing either building area or impacting the site improvements like the stormwater facility, landscaping, etc. Next slide, please. One somewhat complicating factor, though, is that there is an area in the northeast called out for a future building. There's no proposed development of this area at this time, no specified use of the future building. So the parking requirements of what this future area would be can't be known at this time. It's going to remain a landscaped area for the time being. Staff would recommend a condition of approval if the application were approved that requires an amendment to the site plan review at the time of development of this future building area. This would allow the city to look at the development standards, look at the parking requirements when we know what the specific use will be, what the specific floor area and size of that future building would be. And it will also allow us to evaluate a potential future parking reduction request when we know what the general parking situation of the site is, what the uses of the existing building too, that first floor leasable commercial space are. Next slide. The commission's options are to approve the request with the findings in the proposed final order, approve the request with modified findings as the commission directs, to deny the request based on the commission's findings or any deliberations. That's fine. I will turn it back over to the commission. Thank you very much.
Questions for staff?
No.
I have nothing.
I have a couple. Presently, the building, the Tax Lot 104 takes access from the existing driveway. Is that driveway located on Tax Lot 200 as well as on Tax Lot 600 and 104? There is the tax lot for those center. It looks like it is on the map.
The access for the subject property is located entirely off of the shopping center's property. Yeah,
It is off property.
yeah.
Now, the revised access will it, be also completely off that property?
It will be within the right of way entirely. I was very close. But yeah, there's no proposed impact or development on that property.
Okay, the drawings I have frankly do not make that clear.
Right.
And it appears as if some part of that access is actually, on that side, although perhaps that is a right of way line that I'm seeing,
Which here are you looking at?
well, just the title sheet even.
C 0.0.
Or if you wanna look at, sheet 3. I'm having difficulty determining where the right of way.
The property line for the shopping center is this curved line right here.
Yeah,
So everything to the west of that is right of way.
But show where the south property line cuts down, right there.
Right here is the property line.
okay,
for the
that's
subdivision.
the corner of, lot 604, I think it is.
Yeah, this is the corner for these two.
Okay, so-
Here.
The revised access is all on, Lane County right of way.
Yes,
And the revised access point from the map I've seen, it looks like it is directly across territorial from the Jack Kelly right on the accent out. Is that correct?
yeah, the relocation will align it more with the Jack Kelly intersection. Right now, the current access is a little bit to the north of Jack Kelly.
And as I recall, there is a barrier there to prevent people turning left off of Jack Kelly.
I would have to check and see whether people can bring that off of Jack.
I didn't look at it, I came down tonight, but I think there's a Jersey barrier or something that which you go, we're going left off of Jack Kelly.
It looks like there is a left turn lane off of Jack Kelly, so you can turn left off of Jack Kelly. And
No, you can't, you can only turn right. It's right out.
the aerial imagery I'm looking at, the street view imagery, has a left turn lane marked.
Yeah, I don't think there's a barrier in territorial.
Yeah, you can make a left from Jack Kelly onto territory. Yeah, there's a turn in here for it actually.
I would beg to.
We got it. A picture's worth 1,000 words.
In any event, I guess my question is, what is the risk of any, if any, of, vehicle on Jack Kelly crossing territorial to get to this access?
Well,
And if there is a left turn lane or no barrier, then it perhaps is much more real than,
frankly, that wasn't something that was brought up in either the county's review of it or our own city engineer's review. It was the potential for vehicles to travel straight there. Right now, there is no option to do so. It's only left or right.
right, because there's an offset in where the access point was. All right. I have no further questions this time. Shall we proceed to testimony from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Alan Harper, office at 651 Walnut in Ashland. I've assisted end use and planning in Oregon. Happy to help Osmond Group and Dr. Robinson on this application. Daniel's done a great job hitting most of the highlights, and we'll go into the site plan. The staff report is excellent. Jen, could we put up the access again?
Oh, yeah.
I'll just talk about that briefly, because the 8 lines up here on the map you see took us about 4 months to negotiate with the county. This project has been in the works since COVID, before COVID. We're very excited to bring this project to the community. This was probably one of the biggest sticking points, or it's one of the biggest sticking points I've seen in the project. Working with the county, it took us a long time to figure out how that dialogue should go. Because, you know, we ended up with 3 traffic engineers that all agreed that this final plan works. But it was hard to negotiate traffic engineer speak with just normal solutions. But we finally got there. And, you know, what we realized was important was there weren't a lot of traffic counts. And, you know, in a project like this, there's a lot of times it's the volume of traffic that's an issue. Here, and we knew it from the minute when we met with Daniel and Kevin for the first part. The first comment was, you know, traffic coming out here can, you know, make sure you study that and figure that out. And that ended up being, you know, the key point with the county. Really was that, I think there's a bit of a solution that cues people not to pull up and block traffic. So you don't end up with the knock-on effect of people sitting on territorial, wondering if they can get in or not. That ended up, you know, after months and months of traffic engineer counts and multiple reports, and I think we did not just the initial TIA, but 2 or 3 follow-up memos with the county. The key part really was what you see. Jen, can you put up the solution? The 2-car stacking leaving was the thing the county said. This will tell people leaving your project and the mall not to pull all the way up and block this driveway. Because it's a funny convergence. And we talked about lots of solutions, multiple lanes leaving, multiple lanes coming. But aligning it with Jack Kelly was a very positive thing for the traffic engineers. Because when it's offset, if people do try and do anything, then it's extra squirrely. So lined up is better. But figuring out how to cue people to not screw up this driveway is the thing for the county. Having 2-car stacking was the piece that drove it all. So the county told us, push it as far up the hill as you can. But we didn't want to impact the sign for the shopping center because if that sign goes away in the public right of way, it's probably never coming back. So lining it up with Jack Kelly and creating 2-car stacking. Why it took us 4 months to get there, yes, it's a long road. But we finally got there, and I think Daniel soft sells it a little bit. The county will accept it, but you'll notice he didn't say the county loves it. The county will accept it, and we are really encouraging the planning commission to adopt it also, because I don't want to go back and start over. I think we've got a good solution. It's a really hard access point. The mall has access off of Luther. You know, this is really our only access point. And it took me, you know, really communicating with the county. You know, you don't really want this to end up being a takings case where you don't give us any access at all. You know, that's just not going to serve anybody. So finally they came around to being a little more upfront with what they want, and that's the one to see for you. Yeah, happy to answer any other questions. We're willing to accept the staff report and the recommendation of staff on the conditions. I think coming about with understanding about the uses, when we know more about the uses that are in the main building makes some sense. Working with staff on the storm drainage has also been positive. We went from a couple of different systems, which has impacted the site development, the tree removal. We're gonna have to find some great places here in town to plant some extra trees. But we will do that. So,
Thank you.
any
Any
other
questions?
No.
Lily, do you have any questions? Thank you.
I have none.
Of course, any rebuttal, we're happy to answer questions.
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify in support of the proposal? Seeing none, is there anyone who wishes to testify in opposition to the proposal?
I'm sorry, do you want to testify in favor? David?
Oh, good.
You're good, okay. Check.
Seeing none, absent objection, are there further questions? Okay, I will. Close the public hearing, close the record, and we'll deliberate. Seems the only reasonable solution.
Looks like they tried everything.
Yeah. Any further discussion?
No.
I don't have any.
If there is no further need for discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Been moved and seconded to approve file number SR 26-2, E 26-2, P 26-1, T 26-1, SG 26-1, and SG 26-2. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. You are approved.
Thank you.
Many cheers in flames.
Think of all road, I.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
I thought it was me. It's a song. Thank you so much. Daniel in particular, I think we should go on this.
Pretty good.
It's
Pretty good.
feels good.
Yeah, like I said,
Yeah, especially in my place one time, I was really frustrated. But just so you know, we'll work on it.
Next item on the agenda is this presentation from Cascade Partners, Cascade Partners on development code audit and concepts.
All right, they should be joining virtually. We've got Jamin from Cascadia Partners, and I think we're waiting on one more.
Yeah, I can get us started. Hi, good evening, commissioners. Thank you for having us today. My name is Jamin Kimmel, and I am a partner with Cascadia Partners. We are a land use and planning consulting firm based out of Portland, and do a variety of work related to housing policy and zoning code updates across the state. I am serving as principal in charge for this project, and joining me shortly, I think she's maybe having some trouble logging in, but is Mary Phillips, project director with our team. So she will be here shortly. While she's getting logged in, I'll go ahead and get us started just sort of discussing the agenda for tonight. So let me make sure the screen sharing is going to work here for the presentation. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, we are here tonight to provide you an update on a couple of different housing-related planning projects that the city has initiated in recent months, and we'll provide an overview of the background for why the city is starting on this planning process now. And then we're going to spend about 10 minutes going through our findings of a audit of the Veneta Development Code for compliance with a variety of different state laws related to housing development. So you may be aware that the state legislature has been relatively busy in recent months with recent years, I should say, passing legislation related to how cities regulate housing development. And so a major sort of element of this update is to make sure that city's code is in compliance with state law. So spend a bit of time on that. We're going to provide an update on some work that's been ongoing from the Lane County Associated Governments, LCOG, on studying the housing needs and demand in the city. And then we're going to spend the majority of the discussion today discussing some potential barriers to housing development that we've identified in the Veneta Development Code, and some concepts for how some of those barriers could be lessened through some future code updates. And so we want to get your input on those barriers and potential solutions to try to facilitate more housing production and meeting a variety of housing needs in Veneta. So that's the agenda for today. I see Mary's joined now, and so I'll let her introduce herself, and then she'll provide the bulk of the presentation here.
Great. Thank you so much for getting us started, Jamin, and sorry everyone for my technical difficulties. My name is Mary Phillips. I'm a project director with Cascadia Partners, and so I'll be leading us through the presentation, the rest of the presentation tonight. So to get us started, Jamin, you want to go to the next slide? Just a reminder of what projects we're talking about. So our work together with LCOG together is looking at the big picture for understanding and planning to meet the city's housing needs. So LCOG is running a citywide contextualized housing need, which basically takes a look at what the state has determined the total housing need is for Veneta and basically ground truths it to look at how that plays out in the real context of the city. So what types of housing are needed, how much, at what income levels, and what areas of the city. So it makes it more specific to Veneta's needs. And then they're also looking at housing capacity analysis, which then looks at basically how much of that type of housing can be built based on the zone district regulations the city has now. So how much can get built where? So how much of that capacity, of that need, can be met now? And then our part, Cascadia Partners parts of the housing picture that is being looked at by the projects right now is to take that information from LCOG and develop a housing implementation plan, which is sort of a roadmap for how the city can take step-by-step actions to help address and support that housing need and support its development. And then we're also looking at, as Jamin mentioned, a development code audit and update of the development code to look and see how Veneta's zoning and development code complies or doesn't comply with state law, and update it to meet state law, and also look at the development code to see if it poses any regulatory barriers towards the development of that needed housing. So together, all of these projects sort of paint the full picture of Veneta's housing needs and actions and strategies that can be taken to address and meet those needs. Jamin, if you want to move us on. So the project timeline for our portion of this is sort of divided up into sort of three main components plus engagement with the community throughout. We're sort of at the end and wrapping up the first main portion of that, which is that code audit that I mentioned, including some concepts for how the code could be updated to address some of the issues identified in the audit. And then we'll move into the housing implementation plan and start working on some of those draft code amendments, and then wrap up towards the beginning of the summer of next year. There will be a few community engagement events scattered throughout. And in addition to tonight, we'll also come back to talk to the Planning Commission at two more key stages in the project, which I'll go over at the end of the night in our next steps. So with that kind of big picture in mind, I'll dig us into the main attractions for tonight. So first I want to focus us on the code audit for compliance with the state's statutes for requirements for housing regulations and how well Veneta's code complies with those. Big picture, these requirements that the state has for what the code needs to do are required, and they're amendments that the code that need to happen in the code for what we have identified as not in compliance with the state regulations. So Planning Commission, your role is not necessarily to discuss what needs to be done to meet the standards, but your role will be to review the draft amendments in order to make a recommendation to council on the adoption of the code changes to meet the state statutes. So we wanted to make sure that you had an overview of what to expect when we get to that point in the project towards next summer. So I'm going to do a quick big picture overview of the state statutes that we looked at the code for compliance with. Jamin, next slide. The audit itself was actually divided up into three components. So there's the state statutes themselves, big picture compliance, and then in depth, we looked at one particular statute that would require amendments throughout the code for clear and objective standards for housing development. So that's the second component of that compliance statute. And then we also audited the code for barriers that could increase the cost or the time to develop housing. Go ahead, Jamin. Thank you. So big picture, Oregon has passed a significant number of housing related statutes in the past several years to address rising housing costs and the large need for housing across the state. So we reviewed the city's zoning and code against 24 applicable state statutes and administrative rules. And in general, we're looking at the code complying with 2 of those statutes, partially complying with 10 of those statutes, not being in compliance with 7 of the statutes. And then for 5 of the statutes, there's some minor amendments that are recommended to the code, but they're not necessarily required to be codified. They're just recommended for clarity. And this might seem like a large number of statutes to not be completely in compliance with, but it's actually fairly reasonable when you compare it to the number of statutes most communities across Oregon are out of compliance with, just due to the sheer number of updates that the state has passed in the last several years. So you're in good company with this status, and take it with a grain of salt, because there have been, like I said, a lot of updates. So next I'll walk you through compliance with a few different sections of these statutes for where the code either partially complies or doesn't comply with the state statutes. And I'm going to walk you through in the same order that the audit memo that was part of your packet for tonight does. So if you want to follow along, that memo does provide you a lot more detail. As I said, I'm going to give you kind of the big picture. So for the first set of state statutes that we reviewed the code for compliance with are around procedural requirements. So this is how and under what procedures and details housing regulations are reviewed under. So there are quite a few statutes where the code doesn't completely comply, but it does partially comply. And again, this is due to some of the updates in the state requirements. So the first that I want to point out is that some of the review types will need to change a little bit or be modified a little bit for housing development. So limited land use decisions or type 2 reviews need to be allowed on applicable project types. So that will be an update. And then clear and objective approval criteria are also required to exist throughout the code for housing development applications. What will be required to comply with this ORS is kind of 2 parts. As I said, there are some review procedures for the type 2 review procedures that will need to be slightly refined in order to match the new state requirements. But it is also requires that every standard that a residential development is subject to must be clear and objective. And that's why we have a whole separate audit specifically on that language that I'll get into next. So in addition to those procedures for type 2 reviews, some of the other procedural requirements that the code will need to be updated based on are to allow applicants to specifically include a provision that allows applicants to amend their application or suggest conditions prior to the city actually issuing a denial on it. There needs to be some updates that prohibit the application of conditions of approval that would reduce the density or height of a project. That's not the code standards themselves, it's the condition of approval put on the application cannot reduce the density or height of the proposal. And then there are also some review procedure timelines that need to be looked at and added into to allow applicants to opt into having their project reviewed based off of standards that were adopted after they actually submitted their application, but before the notice of decision or intent to issue a decision is issued. So that allows, if there are new standards, the applicant to decide to be reviewed based on those or the ones that were in effect at the time they applied. So those are the kind of procedural requirements, big picture, that will need to be updated. Jamin, if you want to go to the next slide. Next, I'll walk through some of the more general housing requirements and some specific housing type requirements. So the first one, the state requires that the dwelling units not be limited based on familial relationships. So the definition of a dwelling unit will need to be updated so that it doesn't include family in the definition. And this will also apply to terminology throughout the code, such as single family for a housing type would need to be detached single unit. That is required by the state and it'll be updated throughout. It doesn't change what the use is, it is just the name. Next, some middle housing requirements. The code is actually partially in compliance with this, but there are a few amendments that will need to be made. So duplexes will need to be permitted in the RR zone, rural residential, and they will need to have the same standards applied to them as for single detached units. In addition, there are a couple of allowances that need to be allowed. So middle housing needs to be able to have an allowance for additional units when there are accessible or affordable units provided. So there's an extra unit that has to be allowed if the development includes an affordable unit or accessible units. And then finally, for middle housing, there needs to be what's called a middle housing land division process. This is where after you have a middle housing development on a lot, such as a duplex or a triplex, you have that parent lot that the plex is on, and then you can do an additional land division called a middle housing land division, so you can have individual ownership of each of those units on the lot. So that is required to be allowed for middle housing types that are allowed. And I'll go into this a little bit more detail later when we talk about the barriers. Next. More general and specific housing type requirements. There are some rules around single room occupancies that they need to be allowed outright in residential districts. And then there are some clarifications that need to be made in the code around their allowed densities and parking allowances. And these are based on a ratio of number of single room occupancy units to a typical single detached dwelling. So there'll need to be some refinements there. The SROs are currently allowed in many areas, but they need to be allowed outright. And those clarifications, as I mentioned, will need to be made. Next, there are some additional requirements for residential homes and facilities. Again, these need to be permitted outright in areas that permit residential and commercial districts. And then for residential facilities, they need to be allowed outright where multi-unit housing is permitted outright. Next slide, Jamin. Thank you. The next section of state statutes I want to cover are around requirements for manufactured housing. Generally, these updates from the state statutes clarify when manufactured housing needs to be allowed and what standards can be applied to them. So you can see the sort of 4 or 5 that apply here. The Bonita code right now partially complies, or there are some procedures where we're just recommending that they be codified for clarity. And then there are a couple where the code does not comply. So for manufactured home parks, they need to be allowed outright in the LDR and GR, low density residential and general residential zones. And then standards for their development need to be updated to be clear and objective. And then there are a couple of provisions for recreational vehicles that are new from the state that need to be incorporated. So RVs need to be allowed as for permanent occupancy in a manufactured home park when the RV is connected to utilities. And then RVs also need to be allowed for temporary occupancy during disaster reconstruction if a home is destroyed by a natural disaster, then that you need to allow for an RV to be temporarily occupied while the home is being reconstructed. Next. And then our last set to go through are the state statutes with affordable housing requirements. So these again have to do mostly with when and where affordable housing has to be allowed. And the code will need to be updated to allow qualifying affordable housing on publicly owned land, nonprofit owned land, and commercially zoned land. And there needs to be some allowances for affordable housing in residential zones that would create a density and height bonus when affordable housing is proposed. And then there are also some timeline requirements that need to be clarified in the code for how quickly an affordable housing application needs to be reviewed. So again, these are kind of big picture summaries of the state statutes, and now I'll go into a little bit more detail about one particular state statute, the one that requires that clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures are available for the development of housing. So,
question for staff. Several of these are things I thought we were already looking into.
And some of them we have, and some of them are only slight changes, like for example, the limited land use decisions. We updated our code to comply with that, but the one thing that we missed was when someone wants to expand a non-conforming use. So that's why it partially complies. So you'll see a lot of those where it's just a couple of.
Well, one that struck me was, I thought we had had a discussion about allowing divisions of properties for individual ownership of middle housing.
We haven't worked on that since I've been here at least.
I certainly remember that discussion. And when the legislation was passed, and we wanted to move on.
Yeah, I haven't worked on incorporating or writing amendments for the middle housing land division specifically. We have some a separate kind of pathway for townhomes and single family attached, but the state has their very specific parent-child lot that I haven't worked on that isn't our code, which should be, you know.
Thank you. Sorry.
no, that's great. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so that's also why many of those the code partially complied with and may have complied with a couple years ago completely, but had a minor change in the legislation or a refinement in the legislation. So there's specific requirements needed, not whole components needed. So I'll go over now our clear and objective audit. This is the requirement that residential development be subject to standards, conditions, and approvals that are clear and objective. What that means is that the standard is clear if it's understandable, and it's objective if it can be verified without needing interpretation or judgment. So more or less that means two different people could pick up the same application and the same standard and would come to the same conclusion on whether it complies or not. So it's also helpful to understand this for what isn't clear and objective. So a standard is not clear and objective if it has terms or conditions in it such as adequate. So if it requires adequate access, two different people could look at that and make two different determinations on what adequate is. Or if the code says it may require something but doesn't tell you when it's required, that's not clear and objective. Or if it asks you to potentially preserve trees to the extent possible. The extent possible could be interpreted multiple ways by multiple different people. So it is not clear and objective. So we reviewed all of the code to find instances where a standard that was applicable to residential development was not clear and objective. And we identified just over 160 incidents where standard should be clear and objective for the state requirements, but it's not. This is a little high. These instances are mostly concentrated in Articles 4, 5, 11, and 13, with also some in Article 6. And these include standards that are not clear and objective because residential uses might be subject to conditional procedures instead of being allowed outright, or there are ambiguous terms used within the base residential standards or base residential zone standards. There are also some supplementary provisions that might require judgment from the reviewer. And there are several cases where there are design standards applied to the development that are discretionary rather than clear and objective. So updates will be needed for all of these instances in order to make them clear and objective. And our approach to those updates will be to keep them policy neutral. So the intent of the standard will still be there, but there will be clearer language that can be consistently applied the same across multiple applications. So, as I said, all of these amendments to make those clear and objective will be policy neutral, but there may be some instances where those standards are specifically identified as needing a change to implement the updates to state law, or to address a barrier that we identified in the code audit. So those would be the only instances where updates for the clear and objective requirements would not be straight policy neutral. So Jamin, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to pause here. Like I said, that was kind of a big picture overview of the state requirements. As I said, there's not a lot of discussion on what code changes are needed to comply, but we do want to make sure you understand the big picture of what needs to change to be in compliance with the state law, since you will be reviewing those for adoption at a later point. So we want to pause and see if there are any questions before moving on to our next section.
I have a question so much as a concern.
Hmm?
My understanding of case law is not consistent, I guess, with yours with respect to what constitutes clear and objective. It seems to me that there are a number of cases in here where you have raised as not clear and objective things which are sort of in common parlance of land use practice, flexibilities that are allowed to make development go forward. And unfortunately, what I gather from the presentation is that in essence, we are being told that we must, in every case, provide extensive and complete documentation and standards which are not subject to any sort of question. The one thing that sort of stands out for me at the beginning, even in the first part of your memo, you have a map which we have traditionally seen, or a drawing which we've traditionally seen all the time of middle housing. Duplex, attached terrace, triplex, fiveplex, fourplex. Nothing about cottage clusters. Cottage clusters are a recognized form of middle housing. And in the absence of including it in that drawing, one can be led to the interpretation that they are not part of middle housing and are therefore not considered. That is not the case, I'm sure. But in a number of these cases, it seems like we are being asked to assure that there is no possibility of any alternatives. I remember one particular about adequate access to a street. Adequate access to a street can mean different things to different properties. And for us to try and describe in our code all the possible options for adequate access to a street would lead to a definition of access which is probably 60 pages long, because we have to try to cover all of the possibilities. Otherwise, we get into the position of having included some and thereby excluded anything that was not mentioned. And this is sort of a general comment about a lot of the references to trying to make things clear and objective. Clear and objective doesn't mean cookie cutter. And what I gather from the presentation here is that we're being told it does mean cookie cutter.
So there are two components to the state requirement. So one is there has to be a clear and objective route for housing development. The city can also elect to provide a discretionary route for housing development that the applicant would then elect to follow rather than the clear and objective route. So for a standard such as adequate access, there can be a clearly defined way to meet that requirement under the clear and objective path. And then there can be a discretionary standard that the applicant could choose to follow instead if they wanted more flexibility. So as we go through the clear and objective edits, there may be some areas where we want to keep the existing discretionary language, but provide the baseline clear and objective path. So it would not necessarily delete everything that's there. In some cases, rather than modifying or deleting what's there, it would be the discretionary standard can stay, but it's only if the applicant chooses to go that way. And here is the clear and objective route that is more narrowly defined that they can also choose to follow as a baseline.
So sticking to this example, I would say, okay, our clear and objective standard for street access is 20 foot of street frontage. Period. That's clear and objective. I have a developer who comes in with a lot, but he can't make 20 feet work.
Well, in that case, that's where you have the discretionary path, where that
But
gives
what
us
is,
the
but
flexibility.
what is the discretionary path? Does we have to have another, 18 feet if we agree to it, or? Where does it transition from clear and objective, one item, undisputed, no question, to being able to make a development function?
Well, that discretionary path can then be as subjective as we need. And it can say, not specify any specific standard, but just say adequate access to the street to the extent that the city deems necessary. And that's okay to have that discretionary standard because we have the option that can handle most cases, but not all the edge cases, because you're right, we can't write code for every single circumstance.
It seems to me, though, this whole proposition is to create a situation where, because we need to assure, if you will, public safety, public health, etc., we need to adopt the quote, clear and objective standard that is the, if you will, worst case scenario. Something that can work no matter what. And that ends up turning into a situation where 90% of our developments have to figure out some alternative path because the clear and objective standard just won't work for them. And I don't think that's what the legislature meant by clear and objective, and I don't think that's what the case law interprets clear and objective to be. There's one thing in here, and I was paging through here because I can't find where I marked it. But it was about a land division, and you had to submit something that was substantially in conformance with the preliminary plat, or whatever it was. And they, I think, flagged substantially in conformance because it wouldn't be exact. And yet substantially in conformance is a tool that is absolutely essential for any sort of development because it allows for the developers and city to deal with an unanticipated situation.
One way I like to look at it is the discretionary route can be the goals and intended outcome statement, and the clear and objective path is one or more ways that that can be met, but is not necessarily all of them. So the discretionary will still give you some parameters on outcomes, and then that can be a conversation. Jamin, I see you're unmuted and wanted to add as well.
If you have one or more, it's not clear and objective. by your standards.
There can be one or more ways to meet it that are clear and objective. There can be a list of options for, as an example, as long as those options are clear and objective.
Yeah. Commissioner, I just want to recognize your concern. The first thing, this statute is imperfect and it is not easy to comply with. And this is a tricky thing to do for cities across the state right now. And I think probably the best way to deal with this issue will be on a case-by-case basis as you see the draft language that we put forth to try to address those issues where we have flagged the standard as potentially being not clear and objective. When we propose some draft language, we would love for your input on if you think that is too prescriptive or doesn't offer enough flexibility. It's tough to say in the abstract and in general whether each of these issues can be resolved by making a clear and objective standard. Sometimes the downside to creating a clear and objective standard may be too great, and you may just want to leave the language as it is. That's totally something that is in the city's purview to do. So, and again, our role here is if you have a standard that's not clear and objective, then the risk is that you will not be able to apply it at all. That a developer would have grounds to appeal on that basis, and you would not have any ability to apply any kind of requirement. The benefit to having one clear and objective standard and a discretionary path is that you can demonstrate to that developer there is a clear and objective path. If you follow this path, you'll be approved. If you don't like that standard, there's a discretionary path. Then there's no grounds for you to appeal. So part of this is a risk reduction effort because there's always going to be edge cases where we don't know whether it meets the statutory intent. But if you have a clear and objective standard that is certainly clear and objective, then you're going to reduce the risk of the developer appealing and you not being able to apply the standard at all.
Lynn, I think in your example, it's pretty easy. The last one where you said substantially complete, remove substantial and then put something in after. It's either complete. You can either turn in everything is complete, that's your clear and objective, or substantially complete as deemed by city staff.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
You still have that path to let us do that negotiation when stuff comes up, because in the real world stuff comes up and you need to be able to. I think the discretion's in that.
I see what both of you are saying, and I get exactly what you're saying, that if we don't have flexibility, it's very difficult to get things done.
Sure.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I think what they're saying is your flexibility comes after you put that one hard standard in there. Your road access has to be X, or in circumstances where you cannot meet X, you may work with staff to come up with Y. And I know it's a weird.
I'm not sure that meets the test though, because, okay, your standard is 20 feet. What do? I have to work with staff, but I still, then am I waiving my right to clear and objective? Or can I?
Yeah.
Can I waive my right as a developer because it is a state statute that requires it? I don't know that it's waivable by the developer.
I'll let Cascade expand on that if they want, but our understanding is that that's what the discretionary path is for. We can't force them to choose it, but they can choose it, and they choose that at their own risk, and with the knowledge that they're waiving the clear and objective portion of that standard.
Yeah, exactly correct. The applicant can elect to follow either the clear and objective or the discretionary path, and it is their choice which to use. Are there any other questions or comments on the state statute compliance audits before we move on to the next portion of the presentation and discussion?
Well, I'm not
Do
going
not
to ask
have any.
questions that I'm concerned about. I think I've made my point.
Yeah, well, and this is a long project. It's an ongoing process, so you can't, your exhaustive list now, you're welcome to send to talk to Kevin or I, and we can try and work with that as we work with Cascadia to come up with the actual draft code, recommended updates too. Because this isn't it.
Yeah, just one more thing to add. When we go through this audit, we're making a fairly conservative assessment of what may be not clear and objective. And by conservative, I mean we may be flagging more things than is actually practically necessary for the city to change. That some of those things that we flagged as not being clear and objective may be unlikely to be appealed, may be unlikely to be a major problem for you in the future. But we're trying to make sure we cover everything, because you never know what potentially could come up as a issue in a development application. And it's better for you to have a clear and objective standard in the code so that you can point to that and again, avoid the potential for an appeal of your decision.
Move on.
Sounds good. All right, so go ahead and thank you, Jamin. Before we dive into the third component of our audit to identify barriers to housing development, I want to give you a little preview of some of the draft findings that LCOG has from their CHN project. So go ahead, Jamin, one more. So big picture reminder, they're looking at the contextualized housing need for seeing what is actually needed on the ground in the existing conditions in Veneta. So go ahead, next slide, Jamin. So what we're looking at based on what LCOG is seeing so far is that over the next 20 years, Veneta will need to accommodate almost 400 additional housing units, and that more than half of these will be needed for households that are earning less than 80% of the area median income. So this is households that are, or housing that's serving those income levels might likely need public subsidy or other support that might be identified in our HIP portion of the project. And then the other half are more likely to be, those needs and that housing is more likely to be produced by the market. Next slide. So as we think about those 400 units, what LCOG is seeing based on some of their preliminary research and stakeholder analysis, they're identifying several kind of interconnected housing challenges in Veneta. One is that housing values have substantially increased, but household incomes are remaining below the regional median area income. There's also limited and infrequent transit, which increases the cost of living in Veneta and restricts access to employment, services, and education. Veneta's population is also aging, and so there's a growing need for housing that allows for people to age in place. And then in the city, there are also few housing options for permanent and supportive housing in relation to the total need for that kind of housing. And then LCOG's initial analysis is also identifying that there's a variety of housing types that are needed to serve different incomes and different demographics and needs throughout the city, and in general to provide more choice. So recent home construction in Veneta has been primarily, but not only, single detached homes. But the demographic analysis and the discussions with stakeholders that LCOG has been doing indicate a need for more smaller homes, more accessible units, multi-generational housing, affordable rentals, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing, and more housing types such as duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, townhomes and cottage clusters, more manufactured homes or parks, senior housing, and then housing with alternative ownership models such as shared or cooperative housing. So big picture, that's what we're seeing so far. And again, this is just sort of some draft information from LCOG's initial look. And they will be continuing to get more detailed information, but it was good context for you to have tonight before we move into our barriers discussion. So Jamin, do you want to go to the next slide? As I said, it's LCOG's work, but if there are questions, we'll see if we can answer them. But for now, that's mostly just some context so we understand the need for housing a little bit more.
One question I have, is that 400 units in addition to those units which are already not under development, but have been approved? Like, there are a number of projects that are sort of not moving forward, but they have a number of units on the books, if you will. I'm just wondering if that 400 is in addition to those.
The state methodology paints with a pretty broad brush, and they're not getting into that level of detail for our state jurisdiction. So no, it would be what's already on the ground, what needs to exist, and then the projected target number is based off of our population growth, demographic change, things like that.
Because I'm not sure how many units we have in essence permitted, but
Depending on what stage you're talking about, hundreds.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and those are,
is it possible that were those all in fact, come to fruition, we might be much closer to meeting our H&A requirements?
it's possible, yeah, it's possible.
Mhm. Yeah, just I'll note that the methodology that LCOG is following for this, it does require them to look at housing permits that are in your pipeline, so that haven't been constructed or occupied yet, but are under development. And I'm not sure if they have adjusted for that yet. So we expect when they come back to you with sort of the final numbers, that adjustment should be taken into account.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right, so we can keep moving forward. I'm going to move us closer to talking about the housing barriers and code concepts to talk about them. But in thinking about the housing that's needed, the number and the types of housing that's needed, keep that in mind as we go forward, but also reflect on what you know about the community for the community's needs and your experience in the community. And I'm going to give you sort of a brief overview of the different residential districts in the city where that housing might be accommodated before we talk about the potential code barriers and how we might want to update the code to support that needed housing. So go ahead and go to the next slide. There are 3 main residential zones and plus the residential commercial zone. And I'm going to kind of give a big picture overview of each one of these just so we're kind of on the same page for context to talk through. But I also welcome any feedback from you all that's relevant to development in these contexts as we go through the discussion afterwards. Next slide. Thank you, Jamin. So across these districts now, the different zones permit different types and scales of housing, and that translates into different characters and intensities of uses on the ground. Some of these are historical patterns, and some of these have arisen based on what the zoning code allows. So you can see that there's sort of permitted outright the similar types of housing across all 4 of these districts. And then permitted with a site plan review, so additional review and discretionary review are also a larger number of housing types. So the plexes and the multifamily and the SROs and the rest of the cottage clusters, the rest of middle housing. And then there are a couple of conditional uses for manufactured home parks. So more or less that's what's allowed in the code now. Jamin, if you want to go to the next slide. Based on the state's requirements for clear and objective pathways for housing development, in order to have a clear and objective procedure for housing, the housing type needs to be either allowed outright or not permitted. So in order to meet the state statutes, there's going to be some choice as to what types are allowed across these residential districts. The ones with the green checks are what will be required based on what's allowed now, what will be required to be allowed outright after the state required updates. And then outlined on the bottom, there's local choice for what other types of middle housing or multi-unit dwellings would be permitted in each of these districts. So I'll walk through each district briefly. Jamin, you want to go? Thank you. But first, I want to make sure we're on the same page on middle housing. And I think based on our conversation so far, you all have a pretty good grasp of what these are. So I think we might just skip to the next slide. Save time for more discussion. So the first context to look at is rural residential. This is mostly on the eastern edge of town with lots of larger detached homes on larger lots and mostly wide and or deep lots. And it's kind of a mix of the kind of existing rural character properties with older, larger homes on very large lots with lots of open space around the homes. And then some slightly newer areas of a more suburban character where it's newer, moderate to large homes, still on moderate to large lots with large setbacks. Next slide. Thank you. For low density residential, these areas are the southwest edge of town and sort of south central areas of town. And the LDR areas actually account for a pretty large amount of Veneta. It does have primarily detached homes, and there's kind of a mix of older, smaller homes with large yards and newer homes. And in the LDR, there is a good amount of some open developable areas. Next one. We'll talk about general residential. These are a little closer in near the commercial areas and corridors in town, and it accounts for a large area of Veneta. The GR tends to have some of the more newer developments of detached homes that are 1 to 2 stories, but it also does have a mix with some older duplexes as well, a good number of those. And as with LDR, there is a good amount of open developable land within the general residential zone. And what we see is kind of small to moderate setbacks with sidewalks and garages and driveways in front, because again, there are some more newer development in the GR. And then next is the residential commercial. So this is the mixed use area. That's the developed area just kind of southwest of downtown, with a lot more older and existing buildings, primarily homes, mostly small detached dwellings, but there are a few duplexes and one small apartment complex. And then there is some limited commercial in the houses, and the lots themselves are kind of narrow and deep, and there's sidewalks and sort of smaller setbacks. The largest variety of uses are permitted here, and it is envisioned as a mixed-use district, but it is primarily built out, and there's very little area within this district that would accommodate new development. So with that context in mind and the background of the housing needs, I'm going to walk us through the 5 housing barriers that we identified in our audit of the existing code regulations. So there are few housing types that are allowed outright. I kind of outlined the conditional uses earlier. There is a barrier that there's the mandatory mixed use requirements in the commercial zones. There are some higher minimum lot sizes, some higher parking standards, and some limited applications and availability for dividing middle housing for individual ownership. So I'll go into them in order. The first one is, go ahead, thank you, is that there are a few housing types that are allowed outright. So when you look at that table I showed you of what can be allowed outright versus what has an additional level of review for the site plan review versus what is a conditional use. You see that in most places, single detached homes and accessory dwelling units are permitted outright, and duplexes are permitted outright in LDR, GR, and RC. Townhomes, which are single family attached, are permitted outright only in the RR and LDR zones. And then the other forms of middle housing are either not permitted, they're conditional uses, or they're subject to that additional site plan review. And that additional review can add time to development, it can add cost, and it can add uncertainty. And so all of that can potentially delay or hinder housing development. And then all of the residential uses are subject to those not clear and objective design standards, which also can introduce some uncertainty. So the choice here, as I outlined before, is that while you're required to permit duplexes, you can choose to permit other forms of middle housing across the different residential zone districts. So when we get to our discussion after I go through all the barriers, what we'll want to talk about here is what concerns, if any, you have about permitting outright additional forms of middle housing, and then in which zones should they be allowed. And I'm going to talk through sort of each of these barriers because they do kind of interact and build on each other, but then I'll be sure to, we can come back through and talk about each one individually after we see the big picture of all of them. So the second barrier that we identified is that the mixed use requirements for residential housing in the Broadway commercial zone and the community commercial zones can limit housing development in those areas. So again, in BC and CC, residential uses are permitted only if they're part of a mixed use project. So there has to be a commercial component to that project in order to build the residential uses. So that does support what the comprehensive plan calls for the goals for downtown and those commercial areas for mixed use. But it also ties the residential development to the commercial development. So oftentimes what we see is commercial development space can lease at lower rates and it has higher vacancy rates, and there's oftentimes less demand for commercial spaces. So even though there is a high demand for producing residential units, the requirements to attach those units to commercial spaces can make it not pencil out, not be very feasible for the mixed use development to happen. So you don't get residential development in that area, even if it's needed. So the choice here, the conversation here is that Bonita is required to zone for sufficient commercial and industrial lands, and the city can choose to require less square footage or require commercial in more limited geographic locations, or it can choose to permit standalone residential. So we kind of want to talk through for our discussion is if you support allowing more standalone residential uses in either one or both of the Broadway commercial or community commercial areas. If in those areas, all of the districts or potentially some of those districts. And I will point out and remind you that the city is also undertaking an economic opportunities analysis at the same time to get a more updated vision and sense of how much land is really needed for commercial and industrial spaces. So that will also help inform the discussion as we work on draft code later in the project. For barrier 3, actually skip through really quick, Jamin, thank you. For barrier 3, what we identified is that there are some higher minimum lot sizes that might be limiting for middle housing development. So the minimum lot size required jumps fairly significantly between what's required for single detached dwellings and duplexes to what's required for triplexes and quadplexes. And this can pose a barrier to middle housing types in these zones because The land is expensive, and so requiring a larger footprint, a larger lot, means a lot of the raw land value is wrapped into each home at a higher rate. So where you would have the potential for middle housing or smaller housing units to be more cost effective and more attainable, having them on larger lots actually can negate that, and having the lot cost wrapped up into those units for the larger lot does not. It can increase the cost per unit for those projects. So right now, based on the state requirements, Veneta is required to apply the same minimum lot sizes to duplexes as it is single detached homes. However, you can choose to have some variety in lot sizes for other housing types and in different zones or across different zones. So the conversation around this barrier tonight that we want to have with you is around reducing minimum lot sizes for triplexes and quadplexes in the LDR and the GR zones to help support some of that more attainable housing variety. For barrier 4, we identified that there are slightly higher than typical minimum parking requirements that can be adding cost to the residential dwellings in town. So Veneta requires a minimum of 2 spaces per unit for single detached and duplex uses, but also requires a ratio per bedroom for other residential uses. And then in addition to the total minimum number of required parking spaces, there are also requirements that single detached units and accessory dwelling units both provide attached garages and carports. And parking, and particularly covered parking, can increase the cost to development, and its access and circulation also consumes a lot of the land on a lot. So between cost and size, it can impact the feasibility of residential uses depending on the lot size. And this is especially true for multi-unit or mixed-use projects that do have higher parking requirements that are required to be met on site. So the conversation here is around not just what is the appropriate minimum parking requirements, which again is minimum, so an applicant could choose to provide more, but also around what other strategies could help reduce the burden that parking has on the total cost for housing development. So Veneta can choose other parking strategies beyond just reducing the minimum number required on site, such as removing the requirement for attached garages and carports from single detached units and ADUs. And you can also adjust parking differently for different uses. So our conversation here will be around what approaches to reducing the impact of parking required on site are most appealing to pursue, and then if there are any concerns about potential reductions in the minimum parking requirements. And then our final barrier that we identified that we want to talk about is that there are limited land division options for middle housing. So we did start to address the requirement for middle housing land divisions that basically allow a single parent lot to be divided into individual lots so that middle housing units can be sold individually instead of rented or sold as a condo. So right now, Veneta does not have a middle housing land division procedure, even though middle housing types are allowed. But Veneta is required by the state to provide middle housing land divisions for middle housing types that are required, which are just duplexes. So in order to comply with state law, you will need to be adopting a middle housing land division procedure that will apply to duplexes, but the city can optionally choose to extend that procedure to other forms of middle housing. So this would allow for, say, a quadplex development to be done on a single lot and then have a middle housing land division so that each of those 4 units could be purchased individually. So it could increase the opportunities for home ownership across the city to extend it to more uses. So our conversation here will be around the support and any questions around extending that allowance to other middle housing types beyond the required duplexes. So you can go to the next slide. So those are generally the 5 barriers that we identified. And I did want to show you them all together, but I know it's a lot, so we don't have to answer the questions on all of them at once. But I do want to have an opportunity for just kind of general questions, and then we can go back and walk through any questions and your feedback on each of the barriers.
Any questions?
I have no questions.
No questions. Point.
All right, James, should we go back to barrier 1 and get some feedback?
No, it'll be
All right.
done.
Sorry, did I hear something?
No, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you're asking us to respond to your policy questions, from my perspective, I think there's no problem at all in permitting additional forms of middle housing. I think we need to move that in that direction without question.
The questions I would have,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, thanks. I think to get into the weeds into this one a little bit, a lot of it is what Cascadia brought forward is that you have the move outright where all you need is the building permit for the single family home, the duplexes, and everything above that is site plan review. So they're saying, do we want to consider extending the building permit only requirement to any additional forms such as triplexes or quadplexes, certain things like multi-family or cottage clusters are a little more complex, I think, but that was the general idea, right, Mary?
Right. So based on the state's requirements for clear and objective, that each housing type either needs to be permitted outright or not permitted. So based on what's allowed now, you basically get up to duplexes, and then we need to clarify if you're going to allow outright additional forms of middle housing in each of the residential zone districts.
Yeah, it's really a question process. Sorry, go ahead, Billy.
Oh, okay. My concern with adding the additional ones to be allowed outright is it seems like you're increasing the density and the number of cars and things like that kind of exponentially. And I don't know how that looks. I do know that there's some areas in town where there's basically like maybe 1 or 2 spots in front of a house, and they've got, 5 cars that are being used by people in that household. So it's like, well, you might be able to fit them in, but what if you have somebody come over? I wonder if some of these middle housing things might be better if we did them like standalone residential uses in Broadway commercial and community commercial, especially if we were looking at a demographic of people that may or may not be as using automobiles as much or traveling as much or whatever, if that's seniors or whatever. I just kind of worry about parking and the number of cars. And I know that if you have larger lots for like a quadplex or a triplex, that could probably part of that be used for parking in the front. And if you make those lots really small, you're not going to have I don't think you would have the room on the street for everybody to park. I don't know. I just conceptually, I have kind of a hard time seeing that.
I think to generalize from what Lily says, the real issue the real concern about permitting all types outright is the capacity of the infrastructure to avoid support. Every unit will require wastewater services, electric services, stormwater services, as well as transportation services. And if there is a situation where, say, 5 plexes are permitted outright, if I'm a public works director, I may get somewhat panicked at the possibility of all of these sewer connections coming in when I do not have the capacity to handle the effluent.
Well, and another concern that I have is I feel like we're looking at this without complete information. We were told at the beginning of it, we needed 400 more housing units in 20 years. But at the same time, we're not sure if LCOG is considering or not considering everything that we've already approved. For instance, on Cheney and Strike Street, there are a lot of units that have been approved in there. Are those being considered in as part of that 400 housing units? I'm just concerned that we're getting pushed to approve things that we don't really understand for reasons that we don't even know if they exist. I would like to know what LCOG is viewing as 400 housing units, if they're viewing anything that we've already approved and it's 400 more. I just don't want us to get in a rush and create a monster.
Yeah, Commissioner, those are all great and valid concerns. And so wonder if I could just help sort of situate where we are in the process and what more information we can bring back to you later on as we get further along and maybe help you with your decision making. First off, I just want to make sure it's clear. What we're presenting to you today is we're auditing the development code and we're looking at where are there opportunities to lessen the barriers to housing development. But because we raised something as a barrier here, does not necessarily mean that the city is forced to take an action to address that or to change the code. All of these things we're presenting in this section of the presentation are local policy decisions. Really, we're trying to present the potential opportunity and have a discussion about sort of the policy trade-offs and potential impacts of that change. So we're presenting the rationale for why this could help housing development, but certainly there are many other issues to consider. On the issue of infrastructure capacity, I think we can help bring back some more information on that and do a little more coordination with the Public Works Department so that at the next meeting, you may have a clearer sense of whether permitting more middle housing types outright would, and they would anticipate that causing any infrastructure capacity issues. I will note that many cities that have allowed middle housing types do also and are legally entitled to continue to require that the applicant, the developer, can demonstrate that there's sufficient infrastructure to serve that development. So every one of those developments can be required to make improvements, even off-sites improvements, if needed, to make sure there's sufficient capacity. But there are some major trade-offs and decisions, particularly about parking. That is one that I think there's potential for some overflow onto neighborhood streets, more so than there is today. And so that's the question is that potential impact worth the benefit in terms of removing a potential barrier to meeting your housing needs? But I think we will come back with definitely more specific information on the housing need and the total amount that's targeted and sort of to see if that needs to be adjusted at all in light of what's already being permitted.
I appreciate that. I think it would help immensely for us to make our decision.
Not their objective.
Sorry, it cut out there for that last comment or question. Can you repeat it?
Demonstrating sufficient infrastructure is not a clear and subjective test. Clear and objective test.
Sure. There is a way to make that standard clear and objective. That was just my shorthand way of describing it.
And what would that, Lily? I missed what you said too.
Oh, I'm just still just kind of unsure about this. I think we just need to know what the need is.
Mhm.
And if the other already approved units or housings, if those are calculated in that 420 years. I just don't want to feel rushed into making a decision that's going to result in a substandard living conditions for people. Or increased costs on their utility bills or their water bills or something like that, because somebody's got to pay for all the infrastructure.
Okay. Well, what I'm hearing is not necessarily concerns with allowing the use. It's making sure that there's infrastructure capacity and understanding the full picture of what the demand is.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, one quick note before we move on, Mary. Want to make sure it's extra clear. We're not looking for a decision from you tonight.
No, I think we were doing a
vote.
discussion and was supposed to bring up concerns. So that's
Yeah,
what I was doing.
yeah.
Great.
Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay. Then I think we can go to the next one. So for the mixed use requirements in Broadway commercial and community commercial, we will have more information once we have the economic opportunities analysis update done. But for now, we kind of want to understand what your thoughts are around allowing standalone residential in either one or both of the Broadway commercial or community commercial zones.
Well, I firmly adhere to the view that it is the desire of Veneta to be a complete city, to not be a bedroom community. We probably will never succeed in that, but that, from my perspective, is a very important goal for the community. And to the extent that standalone residential reduces the capacity for employment and business activity in the various commercial zones, I would find it challenging. Now, what the EOA shows in terms of our need may affect that as well, but even if, as in the past EOA, we do have sufficient theoretically commercial land available, it's still important to focus a great deal of effort on development of commercial land, particularly in the retail and professional arena. I'm not so worried about having an Intel plant sited here, as I am about having several retail businesses being able to locate here and be able to work.
Yeah, I just want to let you know we heard that concern from the advisory committee for this project as well, and it's a very, very common concern in a smaller town like Veneta. Again, we're presenting this as it's one more tool that you could use to try to facilitate housing production, because some of those lands in commercial zones may be just better suited for, or the market's stronger for residential development. But certainly it's a tension with that economic development policy goal. So a couple of other thoughts about how we could move forward here. Some cities have chosen to more selectively within their commercial zones require mixed-use development when housing is proposed only in certain corridors or streets. And so what we find is we look at commercial zoning, sometimes it's applied to properties that it's unlikely a retailer is going to be successful there, sort of on a side street or off of a major intersection. So that's one tool or concept we could bring back to you is selecting specific corridors where you want to preserve that requirement to have commercial component, and then maybe providing more flexibility for standalone housing in other areas, something we can look at. Another thing to do is just to try to make mixed use development more feasible. And there's some few different tools we could look at to do that. In the code realm of things, it could be things like allowing a mixed use development at a higher density, potentially a taller building, allowing a lower parking ratio. Those kinds of things can make it more attractive to build a mixed use project. So you might still require the mixed use project, but you may try to change some of the rules to make it more likely that that gets built.
Mhm.
All right, any other comments before we move on to the next barrier?
Yeah.
All right,
No.
go ahead. Oh, that was just our reminder in case we needed it for discussion. All right, so some of these do build on others. So for the minimum lot size for middle housing, that does relate to where it would be allowed for our barrier one conversation. And I think some of the feedback that we had from barrier one is applicable here, wanting to make sure that there are not negative impacts to infrastructure, that there's capacity, that kind of thing. But are there additional thoughts on support for reducing minimum lot sizes to make these projects more feasible or to allow them to be more attainable to a greater number of households?
I think my sole concern is the ability to serve the infrastructure.
Well,
There can be other community issues, but those are frankly not within the jurisdiction of the planning commission. We can't make people want to like greater density.
Okay.
I wanna know if we reduce the density, what do we get? What does the city, what does the community get? Those houses aren't gonna be any cheaper. That's the issue. I wish that there were more legislators who had a planning background. Because we do a lot of this thrust on us. What do we get? I was asking a developer who was sitting right here. What happens if you have 100 lot subdivision at 6,000 and we say, okay, now you can have it 5,000? Does the price of the house on one of those 5,000 square foot lots go down? No. No, they get 10 more lots to build on. And the houses on those 10 lots are the same price as the other 100 lots. So if you're not lowering the cost, you're just putting 10 more houses up. How's that help? What does that do? Nothing. Nothing. It makes for congestion is what it does. Every time you pack stuff in, you put way more stress on your infrastructure. Now, if in that 100 lots, we said, okay, 5,000, but those other 10 lots are gonna be affordable houses, they're gonna be somehow, we're gonna work out something that the down payment is taken care of. Something. But until we get something back, that we can really tangibly say, this is what we get for it. It's just building more houses, building more houses, and that's not getting you where you want. One more affordable houses, and that's not doing it. Giving up commercial land, you believed in your downtown and your downtown development plan. You want to put standalone housing there, you'll never get it back, not for 100 years. You've already done it down Broadway. You put residences. This should be this, Veneta's second anchor right here, where City Hall is. And Broadway should be the connection between the two. But that can't happen, at least for a long time, until those houses either go away or get turned into some kind of commercial use. So what you've done is put a barrier. They put a barrier when they did that for commercial development, where it needs to be. So they've kind of gone around the planners on a lot of this, and you know this because you are planners. And you've seen it. What are we really gaining except for more and more and more and more places to live, but they're not any cheaper. And that's the problem. And nobody will take that bull by the horn and say, how can we make housing cheaper, more affordable? It's not by making more houses. So there, I've said my piece.
If I could just maybe add some context for why this is identified as a barrier and why we make the point that it affects the cost of development. Housing prices are really determined by two major things: the cost of development and the market. And so there's two theories at play here about why allowing for some higher density or some lower minimum lot sizes can, over time, affect housing affordability. So the first one is that if you allow more units for every project that gets built, eventually, and we haven't really seen this in Oregon, but eventually you get more units on the market, more supply on the market, catches up with that demand, and consumers of housing, buyers and tenants, have more power to negotiate price or rent because there's more units on the market. And so some of this is, if we can get more units in every project, over time, more units will be on the market. That'll affect prices or slow down the rate of appreciation. So that's a theory that's been borne out in some cities that have allowed for higher densities and supported more housing production in general, not just affordable housing, but market rate housing. So that's part of the theory here. The other is with the minimum lot size is that when you have a lower land basis to spread across more units, it is feasible then to potentially reduce the price of your units and still make your targeted profit or return on investment. It doesn't mean that a developer will always do that. They may still, if the market will bear it, they will charge more and they'll earn a higher profit. That's definitely a possibility. But if there is a higher supply on the market and the market can't bear that higher price, then by lowering the floor and the cost of development slightly, it has a potential to lower the cost of development, the cost of new units. One way you can to more directly try to produce lower cost housing through a change like this would be to also control the size of units in a higher density project. So you might say, okay, we're going to allow a quadplex on a smaller lot, but we're going to apply a standard that maybe controls the overall floor area on the site so that those units are smaller if you build a quadplex. And there's a few different benefits to that, but one thing is that those smaller units are more likely to be affordable to someone on a median income or a workforce level income. So there's some ways to more directly target that beyond just the minimum lot size. But I just wanted to offer a little bit more on our rationale and some of the theory behind that.
Yeah, that's a more reasonable solution. Small square footages because they're going to rent cheap. That will get you a cheaper rent. But just building more houses on a 1,000 square foot less lot is not going to change the price. It's going to be whatever the market price is. Unless what people are always miss is that is the standard. And as soon as they don't have that profit margin, they stop building. I mean, I've seen many times when they get to a point where the market's saturated, they will stop building. When they can't make that, the money that they expect to make they go somewhere else and build. So that's where the theory falls apart. And yeah, I mean, you can't make builders build. So if market gets saturated, they get out.
My concern with um changing the lot sizes on the triplex and the quadplex, you can change the lot size and maybe build upwards, but by changing the lot size, you're also changing the footprint it has on the street, and that affects, on-street parking. It,
And
does that make sense?
yeah, and there's another thing you have to be very, very wary of, because I saw this actually happen. They had a 20 lot subdivision that ballooned into 60 lots in Albany. And what they did was, they came in and they did so many curb cuts, there was no on-street parking, and there was no parking on the lots. And now they've got this development where people are like parking in all the neighborhoods around them, because they've got nowhere to be. So you have to be real careful when you just go monkey with your planning code. The developers don't come in and just use those holes that you put in your code. I mean, and so, yeah, the planning commission's got to do some due diligence here to make sure that we're not doing that. Because that was a nightmare, and it's gonna be a nightmare for a long, long time, because there's no solution for it. I mean, it happened, it's done, and that's the problem, and that's kind of the same thing I'm saying about putting, standalone residential and commercial. Once it's done, it's done. Can't undo it. And just, it's like, oh, well, this is gonna rent faster. You're gonna get more return on that. But that's why we're planners, is because way down the road, when we say, wow, wish we hadn't put all this residential in here, because now we've got no commercial space whatsoever left. And it's okay to have some vacant space in your city, even in the downtown, in anticipation of further commercial development. It's just, I understand there's a huge focus on housing in Oregon right now, but you don't, and I know that we have to do certain things, because of state law, but we don't want to go way above and beyond what we have to do, simply because we can. I think what the planning commission just said here tonight is important to look at, is to, what we have and really take a hard look at what these changes are going to do, what the effect may be, and what the unintended consequences may be too. Because it can go wrong. I mean, I understand the intent is absolutely wonderful, and it is noble to have places for people to live. But if you're changing a house from $450,000 to $425,000, people can't buy it. I mean, that difference isn't gonna make a difference to anybody who can't afford down payment. Their housing strategies work way better than just building more houses, in my opinion. But I know we have to do some of these things according to state law, and just be very, very careful. I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but that's kind of where I'm at. I just want to be really, really careful that we don't do something that's gonna have a very bad effect later on.
Yeah, we will be able to talk more in depth about some of these, especially after we have more information from LCOG. And then there are also some strategies outside of the development code that we'll want to talk about when we're working on the HIP, which is what we'll be talking to you at our next work session with you about. But in the interest of time, should we go through the last two barriers? I think we could probably do them fairly quickly based on how much we've discussed so far. So barrier 4 was the high minimum parking requirements. And really the conversation point here is, we have heard so far a lot of concerns about making sure there is adequate parking, but there are other strategies that can help adjust the impact parking has on development feasibility beyond just the minimum number, such as the existing requirement for attached garages and carports, you could also allow for shared parking in areas that are mixed use, so that less total spaces are needed. So really the idea is kind of some conversation around what strategies might be more appealing for reducing the impact that parking has on development feasibility for housing.
Well, sticking to the residential area for the moment. Roughly over 70% of the persons who live in Veneta who are employed commute to Eugene or Springfield or somewhere else. The transit service is utterly inadequate for that purpose. We have transit service, but it certainly cannot accommodate anything more than a very minor fraction of the people who need to commute. That means we have to expect, much as I don't like it, we have to expect that people are going to need to have cars. 1 car, 2 cars. In some cases where there are adult children in the house, maybe even 3 cars. We cannot prevent people from being able to live in Veneta because they just can't get to work because they don't have a place to park the car. Now, maybe
Yeah.
the solution is $100 million transit project that will provide mass transit from Veneta to Eugene. I would love that.
I read on it.
I can remember, I know that I have in fact used public transit to go to a job in Springfield before I retired. I didn't do it often because I had to stay late for council meetings. But I actually did commute by transit from Veneta to Springfield. And if we had adequate transit, it might be possible to think more about reducing the need for parking. But the reality is we don't have that transit. We're not going to have that transit anytime in the foreseeable future. So we have to recognize that people have to have the only alternative that is available to them.
Okay.
Yeah, just one thing to keep in mind about parking requirements is that this is, we're just sort of asking a general question here, but in the context of a place that doesn't have a lot of transit and you're expected to have potentially multiple cars per dwelling unit or household, one of the ways that you could target this regulation to lessen the barrier where it makes sense to reduce the amount of parking would be particularly for smaller units that are expected to have lower parking ratios. And so, you have a smaller unit, you're likely to have a smaller household and more likely to have fewer cars. So that's one thing we could work on here is a bit more targeted parking ratio. Another thing is one thing that a lot of cities find when they update their parking requirements and reduce or remove their requirements is that most developers continue to provide parking, and many of them provide at a similar rate that they did in the past. So part of this is allowing the market to sort of optimize for the amount of parking that's needed. Developers will be concerned about if they provide too little parking in their project, their project there's not going to be marketable. So another way to think about this is not necessarily that reducing the requirement results in every project building to that minimum, but allowing flexibility for the projects where the developer is meeting a specific need for, let's say only 1 space per unit to try to target that need, and something that wouldn't be permitted under the standards today.
On the commercial side, I see no reason why we can't consider the shared parking concept. The proposal we reviewed tonight. We got close to that because the parking allowances we set on that project, allowed on that project, could very well be inadequate if it were fully built out and we applied the parking requirements to each facility. We may have actually ended up creating shared parking tonight. We don't know. But
You know, in your downtown, shared parking is one of the most beautiful things that can happen down there.
yeah,
You really do build commercial, residential above, residents park there in the evenings and night. And we would visit the downtown, if you use that parking.
Customers
Day while they're off
parking.
at work, yeah,
Mhm.
so, yeah, there it works real well.
Okay. All right, for our last barrier, again, was the middle housing land divisions being required to be an allowed procedure for duplexes and then potential to choose to also allow their use for other middle housing types, other plexes and cottage clusters. So what are the Planning Commission's thoughts about extending this allowance for other middle housing types in particular to help support different and greater opportunities for housing ownership?
so said before, I thought we were already moving in that direction. There seems to be absolutely no reason not to permit in whatever housing we permit, the parcel of land to be consistent with each unit owning its own parcel.
I would much rather see platted out middle housing than just middle housing going in wherever it goes. If it's platted like that, it's beautiful. One question I was gonna ask, because a lot of our it is RR because it doesn't have sewer yet. There's an east side lift station that's gonna have to go in and, you know, to really get density out there. And, you know, my concern as a planner is that when somebody comes in, he goes, oh, well, I've got this extra land, so I've got enough room to put in these, this quad unit, this cottage cluster. But when they do it, and they can by right.
Well, we're even talking about allowing any of that in the rural residential zone.
I thought we were putting it out.
Not in the rural residential zone. We're required by law to have duplexes there, but that's it.
That's it.
We're talking about the zones that we can serve with same facilities.
Yeah, I just add too in the rural residential zone, if there are some of those properties that do have sewer service, then you would need to allow for a middle housing land division of a duplex to create 2 lots for that. But yeah, in general, this middle housing land division is not appropriate or shouldn't be an option where there's no sewer service. It's not feasible to have a septic on the smaller lots we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just offer a little more context on why it differs from a standard land division or subdivision. In most cases, the standards that become a challenge for to create separate lots for units in a triplex or quadplex are things like the minimum amount of street frontage required for each lot, or that each lot must have its own driveway and access. Those are common standards that are required in a subdivision of single family homes. But what a middle housing land division is basically provides some design flexibility where the parking could be shared in one lot and in an easement or a common area. The driveway could be shared in an easement. Some lots may not have any street frontage at all. They just may have, access from a driveway. So that's the flexibility that this process would provide and why it provides some value. Again, to make it clear too that the alternative to selling or creating home ownership opportunities in middle housing would be to create condos. But condos just really don't make economic sense at the scale of 4 units or something like that. And they present a lot of other legal complications. And so really this fits a nice sort of solution for those middle housing types that are hard to develop for sale unless you allow them and to be divided into individual lots.
All right. If there's no further comments, I think we can just take a quick look at next steps. And thank you so much for your time and feedback. I really appreciate the conversation. Just a few things that will be happening in the coming months. At the end of this month, the Project Advisory Committee will be meeting with LCOG to go over some of their earlier results. And then both project teams will continue working on the project components. And then we, Cascadia, are working on some community engagement activities to be at a booth at Harvest Fest. And then we'll be back to see you in, I think, mid-fall, and that conversation will be focused more around the housing implementation plan. In the meantime, if you think of more comments or if you want to share your marked up draft of the audit report, please go ahead and pass those on to staff to share with us. We would love to see all of your comments. Daniel's contact information is here, and so is Pauline on our team, who is the project manager. So thank you so much for your feedback and time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the effort.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Darren.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, looking forward to reconvening in a few months.
We take about a 2-minute recess.
That sounds great to me. We got more. All we need to talk about is the calendar, and then we can.
Okay.
Too badly used.
Hey, you know what, maybe it's a good point, you know what, but here's the thing.
Oh, well, I'm muted.
I love middle house. I really do. But not how it's being foisted on us this way. Please, let me plan for it. We can do it. And you know what? We've always been able to do it with planned unit developments. Always. PUDs have always been a thing.
I mean, even with the affordable housing that they got going on right now, I mean, what they're saying affordable housing is still $420,000.
Right.
And right now they're doing some incentives with a lower interest rate, but it's only going up for like 3 years. And then the interest rate jumps back up. And then
Yeah, you're the developer, right?
no, I'm not. I do commercial work for heating and air conditioning, but I've done a lot of the subdivisions and apartments and all that. So actually, I've even seen with a lot of the low income apartments that were going up. After 5 years, they end up dropping the low income portion of it to where they can check up.
Thing. I put forward strategies on how to make it happen. And you know, it's usually not a payment. It doesn't matter if it's $450 or whatever it is. It's not a payment because you pay so much in rent. This isn't like kids. There's three grown men living in a 3-bedroom apartment paying $3,000 a month. I was like, you can pay a mortgage on a 3-bedroom house, easy.
If the house
And they said, Dad, we ain't got a down payment. So bank of dad, yeah, they can do it, but most people don't have that.
The houses and townhouses just adjacent to me, yeah, I mean, it's got 2,400, 2,500, 2,600.
Yeah.
And
And you know,
Not
who's
much there.
too big to fail, really screwed over. The people who could really use those 3% loans. You remember those? I mean, I know y'all were around. They're 103% loans. You can walk into a house. But people have used it and the banks let them use it. And if they hadn't done that, they would still have those kind of things available. And people who are creditworthy and have the ability to pay a mortgage payment can't now, because they still don't have much, because you can't pay rent and save up for down payments, just impossible.
Yeah, especially nowadays.
Right, so why not work on a strategy, to get somebody into a house without a down payment? And we figured out ways to do that, they had grants that we could get. So we could put in the infrastructure like the water, the sewer and storm. And then the developer could come in and build a house, actually build those houses cheaper, and we say, hey, for that infrastructure investment. We want, 10% of the house price, and then we work with SDCs to get the rest, and somebody could actually.
Like state incentive that we had to like apply for.
Yeah, we didn't have the right project for it at the time, and I don't know if it was still available, but that's the kind of thing, it's like, but. If the state is willing to give that grant, to do that infrastructure, why wouldn't they create grants where developers can build stuff and actually have like a no down home? Because there's the thing, if banks are on the book for these things still, they're gonna look very, very hard at people who are buying them to make sure that they can make their note. And that's the important part. I'm telling you, down payment's been a barrier all along, it always was.
Do you want to do your development activity report real quick?
Yeah, too much. That's what you should be, Jim.
I can try.
Try to make this quick.
I'm a little bit of trouble with the,
You like
sharing now. Looks like. So, yeah. Okay. Oops. Sorry, I didn't get there, second to last, right there it is.
Okay, and then. Open the,
I'm just gonna.
One partition, huh?
Hold on. Oh, the notes, yeah,
yes, yeah, you,
I'm trying to get there. Maybe I just don't do with this. In here and make it. Well, I can just do the front where it's fine. Wait. No, it's not doing it yet.
okay, great, thank you, sorry about that, yeah, we received one new partition, it's a small 3-lot partition, type 2, so the planning commission won't be seeing that one until after it's been. The decision has been issued by staff, and then a couple of other small permits, and from update our short-term rental code, we started to finally, see some short-term rental permits come in as we've sent letters out, begun the enforcement process. Other than that, just, more building permits, we single family homes, things like that, no other notable approvals to note from July. That's about it. No. Then, should we move right on to the calendar review? So, okay, I have a couple things I wanted to talk about. Next September, we are expecting to have LPOG there for a work session, so we're gonna keep that meeting. If that works for everybody, September 1st, or was that first? That's
Right.
September 1st. Thank you. And then, for the past few years, we've been doing an annual city council and planning commission joint work session, the 4th Monday of October, which would be October 26th. This year, we were planning to do a work session with Cascadia Partners and LPOC. So that they can talk to the commission and the council at the same time. I think that's a great opportunity to have them introduce themselves together, both teams and both bodies, all in one meeting. But we, since we're also doing the economic opportunities analysis project, they also want to meet with the planning commission and the city council. So they suggested having another joint work session in November, which would be the 4th Monday of November. That would be the 23rd, the Monday of Thanksgiving week. So we wanted to bring that up, see if that's an issue for anybody. Ideally, if we can, we don't have anything for the regular planning commission meeting in November. I'd like to cancel that one and only have the joint work session, so we're not trying to put too many meetings on your guys' calendars. But how does the 23rd sound for
Works for me.
Okay, we'll make sure to check with Greg and Paula too, of course, because they're not here tonight, but that's what it's shaping up to be. So a housing work session with the city council in October, and then economic opportunity analysis work session in November.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yes.
What was the deadline for the economic opportunities analysis report?
The deadline?
Yeah, we're always supposed to, we're just meeting up on the 23rd, and then are we getting the report?
Will we have the EOA then, or?
Oh, no, I don't think they'll have the draft EOA then. That one is Jacob's project, so I'm not quite sure where they'll be come November. They'll at least have their preliminary employment lands, buildable lands inventory findings. What our current supply and demand of commercial and industrial land looks like. Gotcha. But apart from that, I'm not sure. All right, and that's all I have, so I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
If there is no further business. And our air has gone up to 152. It's officially unhealthy now.
Well, thank you, everybody. Before.
All right. You guys have a good night.
Good night, Ellie.
Good night.
Good night.
I got with a sore
Yeah.
throat. I was getting sick and I realized it was just smoke.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of work in court, nothing but smoke.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Hey, that's the Manita family, they turned their stuff in January. They probably would have been ready to come in March, but the county held them up for months and months.
Was the whole working for so long on that project?
Lane County.
Yeah, apparently.
Lane County's now fun to work with.
Was it the driveway was the
County.
That was the holdup.